Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor magazine. On today's episode, John Gray and Jack Schonely have an amazing conversation with an accomplished aviator and flight instructor. Tim Tucker has been flying helicopters for over 50 years. He has over 20,000 hours of helicopter flight time with 9,000 hours of instruction given. Tim began his flying career at Fort Rucker, Alabama, as a U.S. Army warrant officer. He was deployed to Vietnam, where he became a highly decorated pilot, including the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, 28 Air Medals, 5 Certificates of Achievement, Senior and Master Army Aviator Wings, and the U.S. Army Broken Wing Award. Tim's accomplishments after returning to civilian life are many. His relationship with Robinson Helicopters and Frank Robinson himself had a powerful impact on the rotorcraft industry. Stay tuned and learn about Tim's high-risk missions into Laos, purchasing the very first Robinson R22, developing a safety course that would reduce accidents by 66%, and the thousands of check rides he completed as an FAA pilot examiner. Thank you to our sponsors, Precision Aviation Group, Shot Over, Vertical Magazine.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Schonely.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
We were the very first helicopter flight instructor refresher course to be approved by the FAA. Before HAI or VAI's now course, before the one that the police organizations now do. We're the very first ones. And that approval lasted all the way till 2020 when I left. The new people decided not to continue it, which I was sorry for, but
Yeah.
So we were at one point the first helicopter-only flight instructor refresher course approved by the FAA, and at one point we were the longest running. Not the case anymore.
Yeah. When the instructional part, when you did that initially at 83 to 93, this is what I read, that it cut in instructional accidents by 68%.
Wow.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really needed. I mean, we had a lot of, as I say, instructional accidents that we were able to address fairly well.
Did you find that, I'm not asking for exact numbers or anything, but did you find when you opened it up to not just instructors, but pilots, was there also a reduction rate in accidents in Robinson aircraft that you could say, wow, we're getting through to them as well?
Yeah, there was. It's a little bit more difficult to put your finger on because
Sure.
If you take any 5-year period, the growth of the Robinson Helicopter Company was so great that every year there's 300, 400, 500 new helicopters out there that are exposed to having an accident.
Yeah.
So we always looked at accidents as a percent of the total. So of the accidents, we had this percent was low RPM rotor stall, or this percent was dynamic rollover, and that's the way we kind of looked at it, as opposed to accidents as a whole, because it was hard to get a handle on the number of helicopters exposed, how many hours they were flying. Additionally, a large percentage, probably 70% of all of Robinson's production through those years, and it's still the case today, went overseas.
Right.
And so you get outside the U.S., there are varying degrees of accident investigation and getting good numbers. You know, it doesn't do any good to find out they're not crashing them here in the U.S., but outside the U.S., they're falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
So you can't look at just the U.S. or just one country.
Yeah.
So we had a difficult time getting a real handle on, what are the flight hours around the world and what are the numbers of aircraft around the world, the flight hours that they're flying, and the amount of accidents they're having. So we said, let's not even try. We just said, let's take the ones that we're having and look at them and as a percentage of the total, and then address those number 1, 2, and 3.
That makes sense. Yeah. John was talking about his jet lag earlier. When I read that all the traveling you did over the years, Tim, unbelievable. 30 countries that you instructed in, and was most of that instruction with the course, or was it a combination of things?
No, actually, that's just the safety course. I've
Wow.
done other flying outside of the U.S., but I think it's been 125 foreign courses in 30 different countries and 56 or 57 cities. So that's just the safety course.
That's amazing.
So John, I had one instance where I went and did a safety course in Australia, flew back to California, spent 2 days in California, and flew to Sweden for a safety course. So you talk about jet lag.
No kidding.
That's enough complaining, John. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine doing that. That's crazy.
So I'm curious of all the places you've instructed and all the places you've flown across the world, what's the one place you'd say is your most favorite place that you have flown ever in your life?
The two places that I really enjoy the most, not only from a flying standpoint, but the terrain, the people, the culture, is Australia and Greece.
Okay, wow. Very
However, some of the more far out places where we conducted the safety course was, I did a safety course in Kigali, Rwanda, in Central Africa. The Rwandan Air Force used R-44s as a trainer. So I did a safety course in Rwanda. I did a safety course in Kazan, Russia, which is about 800 kilometers east of Moscow on the Volga River. It's a city where the Russian Mi-8 is manufactured. In fact, I tried to get a tour of the factory when I was there, but they wouldn't let me.
That didn't go well, did it?
And I did one a safety course in El Salvador right after their civil war, where my wife came with me and she was assigned an armed guard and an armor-plated car for her shopping and activities that she went through. So
wow, that's amazing. I'm sure you didn't imagine that that class would take you around the world like it did. When you first started formulating that course, who would think that it would end up being so popular, so necessary that it would take you to 30 countries?
Well, I think it was the growth and popularity of the helicopter.
Yeah,
I just kind of tagged along after it. As soon as you get a lot of helicopters in Australia or South Africa or Russia, then there's need for training and safety and all the baggage that goes with it. So it's really due to the popularity of the helicopter around the world. And that exists today.
It is really interesting when you stop and consider how revolutionary the R22 was to the industry and how it's changed our industry for the better in a lot of ways. The first of which we talked about, making helicopter training accessible to just about anybody who's interested in doing it. But beyond that, look at the missions that it's completing in Australia with the farming communities down there, the cattle communities down there. There's so many unique ways this aircraft is being utilized. Look at North Carolina and what just happened with the hurricanes. R-22s were the only aircraft that could fit into a lot of those communities and those little LZs to deliver supplies to those folks. So it's really, really interesting to look at how revolutionary that aircraft was, and not only that, to look at your impact, Tim, on this community through that.
The credit goes to Frank Robinson. I mean, that man revolutionized the helicopter industry, the helicopter world. I was just along for the ride, but he's the one responsible for, as I say, revolutionizing the whole helicopter world. And we really have him to thank for everything that's come after. I mean, R44, R66, and whatever comes next. In fact, one of my jobs is going to be in 2025 is to start an effort, a crusade, if you will, to have Frank put on a U.S. postage stamp.
Wow.
Aviation is an area that the Postal Service likes to put people on, and one of the requirements is you have to have passed away more than 3 years. So this month is 3 years, and so
it is.
So that's going to be before the book, Jack. That's going to be
okay. That's a good goal.
Date is trying to get Frank on a stamp.
No, that's really cool. One thing that came up when I was reading about all these countries you've been to was about temporary foreign pilot licenses, because this course, like you described, it was classroom, but then there's flying. And now you're in a foreign country as a CFI. And, although, I mean, that changes things. You had to get temporary foreign pilot licenses. Tell us about that. What did you have to do? I'm sure every country was a little different, but what did you have to do to accomplish that?
Well, like you say, every country is a bit different, but the fact is you're in a foreign country flying foreign registered aircraft. So you need to have a pilot license for that country in order to be able to act as pilot in command. So every country, as you say, was a little bit different in what I had to go through. Normally they were temporary. They would last for a month or a period of time that I was there. But what that enabled me to do was to act as pilot in command, and not only act as pilot in command, but in many of these countries, giving flight instruction is a commercial activity. So you have to be able to do this at the commercial level. I mean, ICAO has a standard thing that licenses go back and forth. And as a pilot examiner, I issue foreign licenses or U.S. licenses to foreign people all the time, but it's always at the private level. So even if you have an ATP or an airline pilot for Air France, you want to get a U.S. license, it's a private. However, I needed ones that to be able to operate in many countries at a commercial level. So that's where the temporary license would come in. Sometimes it was just reciprocal. I just had to show my pilot's licenses, medical. Sometimes they require my logbook or the last 3 pages of my logbook. Every once in a while, there was a test involved. For the interesting one was in Hong Kong, where I went to many countries outside the U.S. require type ratings. So to fly a particular make and model, not only for helicopters, but airplanes too. So you have to have a type rating. Well, when the R66 first came out, obviously the first R66 that ends up in Hong Kong, nobody has a type rating, right? And nobody's qualified to give a type rating. Yeah. So I went to Hong Kong and went through a shortened examiner course, so that I could be a Hong Kong pilot examiner, so that I could then give the type rating to people who then instructors would then, give the type rating to the rest of the people. And I did that kind of thing in Russia. I did it for EASA in Europe because, as I say, when the helicopter is brand new, nobody in the country is qualified to fly it.
You brought up something that I want to touch on for a second. You talked about logbooks and having to show the last 3 pages of logbooks. And you talked to a lot of pilots who've exceeded a certain number of flight hours. And a lot of them say, I stopped keeping track of my flight time because it's of no interest to them. What advice do you have for folks on log management and to kind of coincide with what you're saying? How important is it to be current on that stuff?
Well, that's kind of a good question, John, because it's something I struggled with, because the first couple of years of my flying was in the Army, and the Army took care of it all. They had clerks, and I'd get a printout every month and then every year of all my time and the helicopters and the type of flying, and I didn't have to do it at all. So I had a hard time when I started flying in the civilian world of keeping track of my own flight time. But I think it is important, especially if you want to put yourself out as any kind of experienced, qualified, expert, whatever the case might be. You're going to have to demonstrate that. One of the things I do and have done for quite a few years is a lot of expert witness testimony. Well, I had to be able to demonstrate that I have experience here or doing this or whatever the case might be. It's something that you just plain have to do. I think most commercial pilots don't have too much problem with that. They know that as they move up the ladder in the commercial world, their experience and documenting their experience is going to be key to that. The problem comes in that we find with Robinson is individual owners. I'm a doctor, a lawyer, a candlestick maker, and I go out and buy an R44. I'm much less apt to keep track of my flying experience. And we see that during the accident investigation later on. And it's hard sometimes to put together a good picture because in many cases the pilot's not around to put together a good picture of what the individual's flying experience consisted of. So I think it's important. I think with electronic logbooks, it's becoming easier and easier to do. So that's just kind of the nature of the beast. You have to do it.
Yeah. No more fuzzy math on the electronic logbooks.
So another big turn. You have so many turns in your life where you decide to go to meet Frank Robinson. You decide to do this. You decide to do that. In '84, you became an FAA designated pilot examiner. Tell us about that decision and how that changed things in your life.
Well, it was quite simply the R22 becoming more and more prevalent in training. The FAA needed people experienced in the R22 to give all the different flight tests. And I was kind of a natural selection. I mean, I was working for the factory. I had a lot of experience in the helicopter. So I was kind of, as I say, an easy choice for the FAA. Yeah. And so I became an examiner and, I did it from, I think, '84. I just retired from it last March.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I'll give the number, 8,000 plus practical tests. 8,000 practical tests between private and ATP. Everything. 2 of those are mine, by the way. My private and my CFI were with Tim. And so I'm going to start with this. I remember being told that we go to Tim Tucker, okay, as our designated pilot examiner. We try to go to Tim. And this is how you were described to me by the people that, CFIs and by people at Air Support. Tim is thorough. Tim is very fair. Tim will teach you something at some point. It won't just be an exam. You will learn things that you will get from him in that time. And this is a big one. If you answer something incorrectly in the oral, Tim's thing is, that's not quite right. Can you find it? Can you grab that FAR and find the correct way to word that or the correct answer? And so we were really emphasized to have our FAR really understand that book because nobody knows. I mean, maybe Tim does, but John and I don't know that whole book. But if you better know how to find it, and that's one of your pet peeves. Was that an accurate description, in your opinion? Was that an accurate description of Tim Tucker, the FAA designated pilot or examiner?
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO-IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24-megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Well, I go backwards. First of all, as far as the research in the book, that I held for flight instructor tests. I would say to people, whatever you tell me better be correct. If you're not sure,
Yes.
you can go look it up. I have no problem with
Yes.
that. But you got to be able to find it. And I kind of reserve that for the flight instructor test.
Gotcha.
So many times pilots, they're basically lazy. And if I've got a question about a regulation or aerodynamics, rather than spend the time or effort to look it up myself, I'm just going to go to CFI Jack Schonely and I'm just going to ask him. Right? So as a flight instructor, you're going to have all these pilots coming to you because they're too lazy to look it up themselves and ask you. So if you give them an answer, you better give them the right answer.
Yes.
Well, if you don't know it, you're the one that has to look it up. And even as a pilot examiner, I would have flight instructors call me up and say, here's my situation. Does this guy need this? And I feel like, well, why don't you just go look it up?
Yep.
But, so if I'm going to give the answer, I've got to look it up and make sure I'm giving the right answer. So being familiar with all of the reference material, not just regulations, but all the reference materials available is a flight instructor's job. And really being able to run the slalom course through all of that information to find the right answer. That's 70% of what a flight instructor does. Now, let me correct one thing. As a pilot examiner, we're not supposed to give instruction. That's a big point the FAA makes out. So when you say that I teach things, I do want you to leave the test, private pilot test, commercial pilot test, whatever, having learned something.
Yes.
It's not. I would never take the controls and say, let me show you how to do this maneuver, or let me show you a different way to do this maneuver. I would never do anything like that. I would try to have you learn something in taking a subject area and developing it. Okay, I've asked enough questions. I know they meet the private pilot standards on their knowledge of dynamic rollover. But let me take it a little further in an effort to stimulate what you may or may not know, or at least you might learn what you don't know. So I kind of taught it in that sense, as opposed to, a lesson or something. Because
I agree.
Big on pilot examiners not giving instruction.
Instructing. And what the way you just described it is exactly as I found it to be in my experience with you, where you enhanced knowledge. That's probably a good way to put it. And you enhanced my knowledge on something where I met the standard by answering ABC, but then you said, hey, think about D, and think about this one other thing that wasn't required. I fulfilled the requirement. But yes, you described that perfectly, and that's what I experienced, especially with CFI. I remember walking away going, I'm really glad that, number one, I was really glad that it went well, and number two, I was glad that I was you and that I did learn something, and I walked away with something that was beyond what I had gone in with, enhanced it. You were very good at that, Tim. Really, really good at that.
I think it is good to walk out of any check ride having felt you bettered yourself in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to have people leave feeling that way. Of course, you still have to evaluate, and
you did.
Standard is a standard, but I've always felt that somebody should be. I hate to say learn something from the check ride, but certainly have benefited in some way.
Yes. I know I told my students that I sent to you, I told them the same thing that I was told. And they would come back and say, wow, Tim was great. I did gain some knowledge and oh, he's very thorough, but very fair. I mean, all the things that I was told, I found to be true. And the students I sent to you, they came back and gave me feedback and said, yep, that's a good description of Tim Tucker. And you were very successful at that. And
well, kind of the flip side of that, Jack, is when somebody does fail,
yes,
I always felt it important that they understood and agreed that they didn't meet the standard. So many times, again, in say the oral, we get to a questioning thing where, okay, in my mind, he's failed. Yet I'll go further so it becomes apparent to the applicant that, yeah, I'm not prepared, almost to the point where they're getting embarrassed because they don't know. So even though I had decided 5 questions ago that it was going to be unsatisfactory, I continue on so that the applicant actually feels that I didn't fail him, he failed himself.
Yes. Yeah, that's important. We did that with our TFO training. You know, if a TFO was up for their 1 month loan and they weren't going to make it, we would present things to them in a way that they would be the ones to say, yeah, I'm not living to that standard and I'm not doing this to the standard or that to the standard. And they would step away from it. We didn't have to tell them you're not going to make it. They would tell us. I think that's important. It's important. Otherwise they'll go away angry and, oh, that wasn't fair. And I can't believe that I got dinged for that. And no, let me lay this out in a way that you truly understand why you didn't pass this check ride or why you didn't pass this selection process. That's a good philosophy. Couple things with the 8,000 plus practical tests. One is I want to ask you, understanding that there's an oral portion and a flight portion, and you can break it up into both if you want. What's the most common mistake that you've seen? And that is 8,000. Is there something that jumps out in the oral part and or the flying part that you could share that people that are going to be taking a check ride soon could think about?
Well, I think the FAA has done a pretty good job through the practical test standards. Originally, when I started, it was a flight test guide, then the practical test standards, now the airman certification standards. The FAA has done a pretty good job of letting pilots know, flight instructors know, this is what someone needs to know, and this is how well they have to perform to get a particular certificate or rating. So that's kind of upfront. Of these areas, on the oral, I would probably say the biggest problem I've seen is airspace.
Interesting.
But most of my activity has been here in the Los Angeles area, and we have very complicated airspace. I mean, as far as you can throw a rock, you can probably hit 3 different types of airspaces. And so you got to be able to use the airspace, not just memorize a bunch of numbers. So 500 below, 1,000 above, 2,000 horizontally. I mean, that's great, but you got to be able to apply it and know when you apply it, when it changes. And so it's the whole airspace thing, I think, on the oral is probably the one area that I think people have had shortcomings on. I mean, everybody likes to learn about the helicopter and things like that. So on the ground, I would say airspace, and then on the flight portion, again, it's pretty clear, and that's auto rotations, especially 180 autos. At every level, that's always been the more difficult maneuver, because you can go out and you practice it the day before or numerous flights before. However, I weigh different than maybe your flight instructor does. So the helicopter is going to be a little bit different. The wind is going to be a little bit different. So even though you've been practicing it one way, it could very easily be remarkably different on the day you take your test. And you have to be good enough to be able to take those variables into account and still perform to the standard that's required. So that can be difficult with the auto rotations, especially the 180 auto.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
there's no question in my mind that's the more difficult, maneuver on the test.
Absolutely, especially wind. I mean, if you spent the last week doing your 180s and there was, zero wind, or there was wind, and now it's the opposite, boy, that changes that 180 completely. What's your aiming point? How quickly you get that 180 out of the way? I mean, the wind is such a factor.
Yeah, and then there's always the check right thing. You're always doing your practice 180s to the left, but on the day of the check right, for whatever circumstance, you got to do it to the right.
Yes, that
and those kind of things that the variables with the auto rotation, especially the 180, are and that's why pilots need to have this really well-rounded experience so that they can adapt to all these different variables that they're going to have to deal with if the engine quits.
Yeah.
You talked about airspace, and one of the things that I liked about going to Hellestream out of John Wayne was just that, the airspace considerations you had. You've got John Wayne, Long Beach, and then LA airspace, all in a pretty close geographic area. So you could experience as a student all three of those different environments in a matter of 30 minutes. So to understand, I think, those different airspace considerations is tough for some folks because they don't have a lot of complex airspaces where they might be flying or training. So to come out to somewhere like Hellestream or Southern California in the LA area, where you've got that and you can experience that and be able to, apply that theoretical knowledge to practical application, I think is huge. So I think for me in Southern California, I took that almost for granted that I could understand that and talk about that in a way that made sense. But I think it was mainly because I had the opportunity to fly in that, and actually do it.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for that.
And, of course, another thing, John, about Hellestream is Rod Anderson, one of the owners of Hellestream. He's like me. He's a former
great.
Army pilot,
Yep.
retired from the reserves. And actually, Rod worked for us in that very first R22. So Rod flew Ship 3, Ship 4.
Oh, wow.
So Rod is from Hellestream, has been flying the R22. In fact, now, since I don't fly anymore, he's been flying it longer than anybody who's currently flying the R22. So you couldn't have a better everything owner, chief instructor than Rod Anderson at Hellestream.
Yeah, I remember going into the check ride with him on both the private and commercial, and just talk about putting someone at ease and kind of eliminating some of that stress. Rod was really good about putting you at ease, trying to make you feel comfortable. He was really, really good at that, and very thankful for him and what Hellestream is doing for Southern California. But law enforcement seemed to have chosen Hellestream for a lot of training activities, which has worked out really well. So very thankful for them.
Yeah, no, Rod, he'll probably, if he sees this, he'll probably kill me for mentioning this. But I was an instructor in the Army when Rod came. He'd been on active duty, got off of active duty, been away from flying for a number of years. He joined our reserve unit, and I was his instructor on that very first flight. And he was very concerned. Here he hadn't flown anything for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, something, maybe even longer. I'm not sure. And he was wondering if it's all going to come back or how quickly. And you kind of go back almost to that student pilot mode. And, we had seen that a lot with him. So Rod, just relax. It'll all come back to you like that. And I think it took Rod maybe about 5 seconds for it to come back. And he never stopped. So
yeah. Good stuff.
I recall the most stressful thing about going to Long Beach and meeting up with you, Tim, was not getting yelled at by the tower. And we don't have to go any further. I know Tim knows what I'm talking about. There was a particular tower person that was a little difficult at times at Long Beach back in the day. That was stressful.
Yeah, it is stressful, and we used to complain quite a bit.
I know.
To the tower chief about him, and I remember one time I did something he didn't like, and he said when I get on the ground, he wanted me to call him, and he said, "So let me give you the number. You ready to copy?" And I came back, and I'm not going to use his name, but on the radio call I did, and I said, "I have no problem with what I just did. So if you want to talk to me about it, I'll give you my phone number. You can call me. Are you ready to copy?"
I love it.
And that was like, oh my gosh.
That was always an adventure at Long Beach because of that one individual.
He was famous in the local area. He was famous.
Boy, he was. He was tough. But I remember, I don't remember the details, but I remember you responding to something he said on one of my check rides, and I went, "Oh, I love that," because something I would have never said, but Tim Tucker could get away with because of his experience and the time that he spent there, and the truth was on your side and the way you did it. But so let's go to one other thing from 8,000 plus practical tests. Downright scary moments. I know you've had some. There's no doubt in my mind. Are there any that jump out at you where you went, "Oh my gosh, I'm glad I survived the day"?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Sure. I mean, especially as a pilot examiner, you're flying with somebody you've never flown with before.
Yeah.
When you're that individual's instructor, you get to know them and shortcomings they might have and weak areas. But with a pilot examiner, you've never flown with them before.
Yeah.
So you've got to try to determine that point at which the aircraft's getting close to the capabilities of you being able to intervene and take over. And trying to determine that point, sometimes we err. So there have been some auto rotations where, I've grabbed the controls close to the ground and, by the luck of the draw, we didn't hit the ground, or throttle chops that the RPM got pretty low. I was just praying it came back.
Wow.
Kind of thing. So that's just part of, occupational hazard, though.
It is.
Of testing a private pilot.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. You notice, John, that when I asked him that question, I should have said, "And don't talk about the times I scared you." and I didn't add that. And I was just sitting here going, "Okay, don't talk about those two check rides with me."
Well, there was a time when the FAA had no limitations on the make and model of helicopter a pilot examiner could give a test in,
right?
As long as it was under 12.5. So we could give a test in anything. So I would find myself sometimes in helicopters I had either not flown before or had, I flew 10 years ago for a short time.
Yes.
And so it was always a little harder in those helicopters where I didn't have that much familiarity with the machine. Now the FAA requires requirements on what you can give a check ride in. So they've cleaned that up quite a bit.
Yeah. That's that. Like you said, it's occupational hazard. Every flight instructor has stories. I have stories as an instructor. I know the people that taught me have stories about me as an instructor, but certainly in 8,000 practical tests, especially, I love that you mentioned, you don't know them. Sometimes you might know of them or you had them for a private. Now they're there with your commercial or CFI, but you don't know this person. And now you're getting in a helicopter with them and you're turning the throttle off. And, there's a lot of trust there.
Sure.
You're hoping that their instructor did well.
Sure. But, you go at it slowly. You don't go out on the very first maneuver out of the chute, chop the throttle.
Right.
You do all of the basic maneuvers first. And so you over the course of that 45 minutes, hour, whatever, you try to gauge a sense of
Sure.
his pilot skills, abilities, and sometimes you get to the point where I don't even want to do this maneuver with this guy. I better fail him on something simple.
Oh my
There's no
gosh.
way he's going to be able to handle a hovering auto in this little R22 with no wind there.
And that wasn't my check rides. But just so it's clear, I passed mine. Oh my gosh, I could hear it already. Yeah, he was talking about Jack. He was talking about you. I got to feel him on something else. I don't want to do an auto with him. Oh my gosh. The time is flying by, but we have to get to a couple things here that are really, really important. And this one's really cool because this is neat that you were instructing in Switzerland and back in 2011. And one of the attendees was a guy named Claude Vachard. And your interaction with him led to some very interesting outcomes in flying techniques. Talk about meeting Claude Vachard, what happened there, and then talk about the development of the Vachard technique and your input on that.
Okay. Let me preface this by saying I do have an essay on my website that goes into this whole explanation. And I think I even wrote an article for Vertical Magazine on this. But in a nutshell, what happened is I was teaching a Robinson safety course in Western Switzerland, the town of Neuchâtel. And this is 2011. I had, as one of the attendees in the course, this older gentleman. He was a senior examiner for the Swiss FOCA. It's the Federal Office of Civil Aviation. They're equivalent to the FAA. And as a normal part of our safety course, we dealt with the vortex ring state. And so I went through the vortex ring state and what I now call the traditional recovery. And he said to me, he said, "Can I show you how I do it?" Now, I've done a lot of these foreign safety courses, and I'm always a little unsure when there I am in a foreign registered aircraft with a foreign pilot speaking to a foreign controller in foreign airspace, and I get, "Can I show you how we do it?" kind of thing. I'm always a little concerned there.
It's kind of like hold my beer, right? It's
He was experienced and worked for the FOCA. So against my better judgment, I said, "Okay, you have the controls." And we were in an R44, and he proceeded to show me this recovery technique from the vortex ring state that after I practiced it, 4, 5, 6 times, I was amazed. I was making recoveries from a vortex ring state that was fairly well developed with altitude losses of 30, 40, 50 feet. So when I came home from that course, I took the other flight instructors that flew the Robinson safety course out and showed them. And I said to the guys, just go out and play with this on your own for the next couple of months. And then we'll get back together and we'll talk about it. We got back together a few months later, and every single one of them was agreed that this was a much more efficient way to make a recovery from the vortex ring state. And when I say efficient, you can recover with the least amount of altitude loss. Altitude loss is the thing, right? Because if you don't have the altitude, it's back to the ground. So recovering with the least amount of altitude loss is the most important thing. And all were agreed that this was a much more efficient way than, as I say, what I call the traditional method. So we put it into the safety course. I wrote the maneuver up and put it into the maneuvers guide for the safety course. And we began teaching this other recovery technique. Now, at the time, we just referred to it as another recovery technique or an alternate recovery technique. There was no name associated with it at all. And after, I'd say, about 2 or 3 years, and remember, we teach the course once a month. So there's 50, 60 people in each course. So we had quite a bit of experience in teaching it. common student errors, best way to approach it. And after a couple of years, I decided that, this is so good. The rest of the helicopter industry should be aware of this. Now, on my own, at the time, I was designated to give tests in 14 different make and models by the FAA. So I tried this recovery in all the helicopters I was designated to give a test in, everything from an S-76, AS-365, down to a little R22. It worked great in all of them. Little modification you got to make depending on which way the rotor spins, but it basically worked great in all of them. So I said, we really got to spread this to the helicopter world as a whole. So first thing I said, well, if we want to try to spread it, we've got to brand it. We've got to name it. I think that's going to be much easier to spread. So I didn't want to name it after myself or Robinson, because people would then think I was so associated, my name with Robinson, that this is just a Robinson thing. And I fly a Jet Ranger, or I fly an AS-350, or, so that's a Robinson thing. So I didn't want to use my name or Robinson. And I just felt it was natural to name it after the person who had showed it to me, Claude Bichard. So I sent Claude an email and told him what I was going to be doing and asked his permission to use his name and call it the Bichard Recovery. Now, as Claude goes around the world giving presentations, he uses my email. He puts that up on the thing as an email that he says changed his life. So we called
it has.
Recovery, and we went on a crusade. I wrote magazine articles for helicopter magazines, one from South Africa, one from Australia, the UK, obviously the US. We incorporated it in all of our safety courses, both at the factory and foreign. And then I got what Frank Robinson agreed to do is that he would pay for all my expenses, hotel, airline. I would donate my time, and anybody that held any kind of helicopter safety seminar, the FAA or pilot groups, if they wanted me to come give a talk on the Bichard Recovery, I would go. So over the course of about 2 years, I probably did, 18, 20 different safety seminars all over the U.S. On the Bichard Recovery. I gave a number of demonstrations or presentations, I should say, at the Heli Expo for 6 or 7 years straight.
Yeah.
All in an effort to get the word out. And slowly over the course of years, the word's gotten out. And now with the FAA's publishing their 2019 revision of the Helicopter Flying Handbook, which explains the Bichard Recovery, it's now pretty much an accepted recovery. It's accepted within the YASA world in Europe and in numerous countries around the world.
Wow.
Amazing.
So that's kind of a short story of that, how that whole happened.
And it starts with an attendee of a class asking his instructor if he can show you, can I show you something? That's amazing. I love that because the way it evolved and now it's the accepted recovery.
Well, I think also, Jack, as I've gone around explaining it, I get a lot of people that will say, I worked for an external load company in Alaska, and we did that same thing all the time. And I think it's a technique that was used by individual companies. But I think what we did is we actually formalized it, put a name on it, and began teaching people. Prior to that, it had just been tribal knowledge in a certain company. If you went to work for this company that specialized in external load, you might learn how to do it. But that's it. So I think we kind of just took something that was out there, just kind of made it a little bit more mainstream.
Yeah. Really cool. Really cool. I've said for years, I learned something every time I teach a class someplace. I learn something. And I think instructors need to be open to that happening, because it can, and it sure happened in Switzerland. And wow, look where it ended up. Amazing. Couple things that we need to talk about as we're getting to our time here. Tell us about this app that you're involved with. It's a weight and balance app. There's 13,000 downloads out there. Tell us about the weight and balance app, what it's called, what you can do with it, that our listeners might be interested in.
This podcast is powered by Vertical Magazine, which is more than just your favorite rotorcraft publication. Vertical's grown far beyond print to become a dynamic multimedia brand that keeps you informed, inspired, and connected. With digital access via verticalmag.com, podcasts on the Helicast platform, rotorcraft buying and selling via helitrader.com, helicopter maintenance conferences, extensive reach across social media, and an impressive catalog of visual content. Visit verticalmag.com to learn more.
Okay, it's I got together with Klaus Richter from Geronimo, and he's really the brains behind this app. All I really did was just provide the Robinson helicopter context. There's an app for each model of the R22. So I provided all of the specifics on the Robinson models. Most of the computer work was done by Klaus Richter, and it is a weight and balance app, and for the most part, a performance app. And the unique thing is that on the weight and balance app, instead of typing numbers in, empty weight, moments, stations, all of that, we have sliders. So you just slide this little slider to the appropriate weight, moment, whatever. And as soon as you exceed a limitation, max gross weight, forward CG, seat limitation, whatever the case might be, the little model helicopter turns red and comes up with what you've exceeded the gross weight. So now you have an option. You can go down to the fuel slider and just slide the fuel down until the red disappears. And then that's how much fuel you're allowed to take. Or you can go to a baggage compartment and take out baggage with the slider, or a pilot station and take out a person. So the adjustments are instantaneous. And so you see on the weight and balance diagram, as you're moving the slider, the center of gravity will move instantaneously. So, for example, in an R22, I always have a problem with me and one other person can't fly an R22 with 2 full tanks of gas. So I'll put all of our weights in and then just move the fuel slider down until the red disappears, and then that's how much fuel I take. Another problem we have in the R22 is exceeding the forward CG limit. And so if we exceed the forward CG limit, just tap on a door, the door disappears, it immediately recalculates the longitudinal CG, and many times you can just get back into your CG by just taking a door off. Or in the R44, I need to take 2 doors off, or whatever the case might be. So that's the weight and balance portion. And then the performance portion is all of the performance information, again with sliders. So you just with a slider put in your pressure, altitude, temperature, all your OGE, IGE numbers come up, your V&Es come up, your 5-minute takeoff power, max continuous power. All of these things are instantaneously calculated based on your moving of the sliders. So it's been probably about 10 years now. And as you say, we've just passed our 13,000th download. Yeah. And it's being used in 55 countries around the world. I use them myself all the time because it is so instantaneous.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I might add, people can go to Geronimo.com for more information. Scroll down and you'll see the Tim Tucker series. Geronimo also has apps for a lot of different other helicopters. The Jet Ranger, the H-125, numerous ones. I'm only really involved with the Robinson. Right. So you have to kind of scroll down to the Robinson series, and there's a video that we did on how the app works. But there's information there on all of the apps that they have. They're fantastic.
Outstanding. That's really helpful. In retirement, recent retirement, I might add, you've created a poster That's the 10 Commandments for flying a helicopter. It's really amazing. Again, you can see these 10 Commandments on Tim Tucker's helicopterworld.com, and they are right on the money, all 10 of them. Talk about that poster, why you decided to do it, and anything else you want to tell us about that poster.
Well, first of all, I had a lot of fun doing it because what I did is I worked with a cartoonist and we came up with a caricature of each commandment. So, for example, flying into wires, a little cartoon of a helicopter that's got a face on it. So the helicopter is kind of a person about to hit a wire and the surprised look on its face. So each commandment has a little cartoon that depicts the commandment. And then I wrote the commandment in Shakespearean English, Old English, which I actually had a friend of mine's wife is an English professor at Oxford in the UK. And she actually went through all of the Shakespearean. So all the these and the thous and everything are correct. So that the grammar for this Shakespearean English is correct. So each commandment is, as I say, written in this biblical kind of Shakespearean English, and there's a little cartoon that kind of goes along with it. And as I say, something I had a lot of fun doing. And the posters are free. I don't sell them. I just hand them out we used to hand them out at the Robinson safety course all the time. And whenever I go give a talk, I bring a bunch and hand them out. And if people want one, they can just send me an email. And, I have started to charge for shipping because, so it's, $6 or $7 or something like that. But it's been more of a fun thing than anything else.
Well, it's perfect for any hangar. It really is, because they are 10 real deal commandments that if you follow them, you have mitigated a lot of risk if you truly follow what Tim has pointed out and from his experience. It's a really effective poster.
Yeah, it's a safety poster. So you're right. A hangar, pilot lounge, flight planning room, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We've got to at least let you comment on this because this is a big deal. This year, you were inducted into the Flight Instructors Hall of Fame. Anybody that's listened to the past couple hours knows exactly why that is. But tell us about that honor.
Well, I was appreciated that quite a bit. It was done at the Air Adventure in Oshkosh this last summer. And the thing the reason I really appreciated it is because it was an award that goes outside of the world of helicopters. My little world of helicopters, when you look at all aviation, it's really quite small. And the National Association of Flight Instructors, they're mostly an airplane community. So the fact that they acknowledged a helicopter person, I thought was really good. So the fact that, as I say, got outside of the helicopter world, for example, John and Martha King were the last recipients of it. And so the fact that, as I say, went outside the world of helicopters, I thought was impressive.
That's a great honor. And in Oshkosh, I mean, geez, Oshkosh is awesome. John, the time has flown by. I knew it would. We could spend 6 hours doing this easy, but as we're wrapping things up, anything that's jumping out at you on your mind as we close things out?
Man, I'm just blown away by how much of an impact you've had on the helicopter community since your time in the U.S. Army. That was the foundation for everything that's followed, and you've made a positive impact just about everywhere you've been. I shouldn't say just about everywhere. Everywhere you've been that we've talked about, you've made a positive impact, and you continue to do that today. So I'm just honored to sit here and talk to you and spread the knowledge of the things that you've done. People like the Vishard recovery. I remember learning that when I was in flight school, and I didn't obviously know the background and story behind that and the fact that you were a part of that. So I think it's important for us as a community to understand where these these different things came from, and to look up to people like yourself, Tim, that have been a pioneer in our industry and have created safe practices as a result of all the efforts you've put into our community. So I'm just thankful for our time to sit here and talk to you, and thankful for all the efforts you've put into our community to make it a better place. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Look forward to meeting you in person sometime and shaking your hand and buying you a beer as a thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
I'll finish with this. I'm going to ask you a question because, and then I'll wrap it up, and you'll see why I want to hear from Tim about this. A while back, 2022, you wrote an article for Vertical magazine on how to avoid inadvertent IMC. Inadvertent IMC kills more law enforcement pilots than any other hazard, anything else that you can describe. That's the one thing that consistently hurts and kills our fellow officers flying rotorcraft, particularly. Briefly, could you talk about how to avoid inadvertent IMC? I mean, we could talk for 2 hours on that. I know you could. But tell us something that you can leave us with that there are pilots that are listening, our crews that are listening, because it's a crew thing, can take away that to avoid that killer in our industry.
Okay, well, like you say, Jack, that is a big subject, and
it is.
In fact, at Heli Expo every year, I'm part of a whole symposium on inadvertent IMC. So it's a big subject. I'll just say that the article I wrote for Vertical, it tried to focus on avoidance. I think when you go to a lot of these classes and a lot of these articles, you'll hear a lot of, this is what you should do if you inadvertently go into the clouds. And then for whatever rabbit hole that particular person is trying to go down to get pilots to do, where I think it's better to approach it from don't go into the damn clouds in the first place. So we came up with what we call the avoidance process. And I'll just be real quick here on what the avoidance process is. It's kind of 3 steps. The first step is the decision to take off. And we have a number of things that what you can do in helping to make that decision to take off. Personal weather minimums, things like that. The second, and I think the most important, is what we call now en route decision triggers. Now, I used to call them en route decision points, but the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team came up with a white paper a couple of years ago, and they called them en route decision triggers. And I like this word triggers much better because it connotates doing something, action, trigger. And they're basically 3 of them. And one is location. So during your flight planning or during the flight, you have defined an area where you're going to make a decision. It might be a location. It might be a point where weather on this cross country is forecast to change or get worse. It might be you're going to change the terrain. You're going to enter the mountains, or you're going to go over the desert. Something that changes. So you want a point at which you're going to make a decision, whether you're going to continue or divert. Next would be airspeed. I think we say that if as you were flying and as the visibility is, it doesn't go from great to bad instantly. It normally deteriorates over time. So as you're flying along and as that visibility is getting less and less and less and less, what do you do in your car? You slow down. So as you're slowing down, because that visibility is getting, have a target airspeed. We think it should be 30 knots off of your cruise speed. So if you're cruising at 90 knots, 60 knots. To where if you have to slow down less than that 60 knots, that's the trigger. Turn around, divert, or land.
Yeah.
Altitude would be the third trigger. Again, the ceilings will normally get lower and lower and lower as the flight continues on into deteriorating weather. So have an altitude. I think 300 feet in the daytime, maybe higher at night would be good. Where if the ceilings are getting so lower that you have to descend below 300 feet AGL, that's the trigger. Turn around, find a place to land. And then the third step, and this comes from a magazine article that Matt Zucchero, the president of HAI, since passed away, wrote quite a few years ago. And the title of his article was Land the Damn Helicopter.
Yep, I remember that.
And from that article, HII then developed this whole Land and Live program came from Matt's article, Land the Damn Helicopter. And so the third step is just that, land the damn helicopter. And I think, there's going to be issues in landing, upset passengers. You might have to deal with media or law enforcement, all those kinds of things. But be that as it may, the last step is to land the damn helicopter. And I think as you're in these situations where visibility or ceiling is deteriorating, you might begin to note spots on the ground that that'd be a good place to turn around and come back to if I need to, kind of thing. I think there's this thing among pilots to continue into and find themselves in a situation that they can't recover from. So that last step of land the damn helicopter.
That is what I was looking for.
Don't get into those clouds in the first place.
That's right. That's why I wanted to end on that. That is very impactful. And I'll just wrap by saying this. Very thankful that you agreed to join us, Tim. Very thankful. Your life in aviation since 1970 has been about a lot of things, but the one consistent thing is it's about saving lives. Whether it was special forces in the jungle, whether it was brand new pilots learning from you, the courses that you've taught, the articles you've written, the podcasts you've done, it's about saving lives. And your wisdom and experience is just, it's incredible. I told John this morning, I said, I'm a little overwhelmed for today's podcast. And the reason was because of your background. And we've had people on here that are incredible people, but your background is so unique, Tim, and you've done so much and so much for the industry and for our country. It was a little overwhelming. And I'm really happy that you joined us to share some of that wisdom, because we're all smarter because of it. And every pilot that and crew member that's been listening to this, you're better than you were 2 hours ago. If you put the things that Tim Tucker has said to practice. That's the important part. They have to put it to practice. So, Tim, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate, again, the kind words.
Oh, John, it was as good as I knew it was going to be, right? We knew it.
Man, what an awesome time we've spent here with you. And, with what Jack said, hearing this and processing is one thing, but the important part is actually putting into practice. So encourage y'all to not just listen to Tim's words, but to heed them as well.
And again, I'll say it one more time, Tim Tucker's helicopterworld.com. There is a lot of great information at your fingertips right there. The essays, the Vietnam essay was absolutely riveting, but there's a lot of stuff, the safety part of it, everything, Tim's background. You can learn more. And I encourage you to go to that. It's really a valuable resource for any pilot out there. So with that, thanks, Tim. Thanks, John. It was a great 2 hours plus. It flew by, and can't wait to talk to you again. And I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as we did.
Thank you very much to the two of you, and fly safe, everyone.
Fly safe, everybody. That comes from the man, Tim Tucker. Thank you. Fly safe.
Right. Cheers. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers. This podcast is powered by Vertical Magazine, which is more than just your favorite rotorcraft publication. Vertical's grown far beyond print to become a dynamic multimedia brand that keeps you informed, inspired, and connected. With digital access via verticalmag.com, podcasts on the Helicast platform, rotorcraft buying and selling via helitrader.com, helicopter maintenance conferences, extensive reach across social media, and an impressive catalog of visual content, visit verticalmag.com to learn more.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Thank you to our guest, Tim Tucker, for sharing his extraordinary 54-year journey in aviation with us. From his experiences flying the Huey helicopter in Vietnam to his vital contributions to flight instruction and safety innovations, Tim's stories and lessons remind us of the dedication and resilience that shape a successful pilot. We hope you gain valuable insights into the world of military aviation, the evolution of helicopter training, and essential safety practices that can enhance your flying experience. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and give it a share. Be sure to check out the Vertical Helicast's YouTube channel, as well as the Vertical Magazine YouTube channel for incredible helicopter videos from around the world. Stay connected with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for more episodes and updates. Until the next time, fly safe, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Hangar Z podcast.